Hello everyone. My name is Kaja Eichler and I want to warmly welcome you to our Future Cities Studio event today to share some insights and real-life case examples on how companies and cities are approaching sustainability questions. And what is the topic of today? The EU Taxonomy. I am working as Head of Sustainability at Business Area Buildings at AFRY. And the EU Taxonomy is something which I hear a lot from our customers. Sustainability is important to them. So naturally, they're interested in the taxonomy. But it's not fully clear yet what does it really mean to them. I believe today we can cast some light upon that. So again, sincerely welcome to the event. We have today 1 hour reserved for this topic. And I'm very happy to say that we have huge amount of expertise today here with you, both our guest panelists and AFRY colleagues. We will start with painting the bigger picture and talk about the background to the EU taxonomy, followed by a concrete business case. After that, we will have a panel discussion to better understand the different perspectives. And we will sum up with examples of how to do real improvements from sustainability point of view. But about some practicalities. This event will be recorded and you will be able to watch it later at AFRY's YouTube channel. In case you have any questions, please use the chat function that is available. And we'll do our best to answer them in the end of the event and even afterwards. So please send us your questions. So let's get started. As you know, the European Union has set climate and energy targets for member countries and is therefore directing investments towards sustainable projects and activities. One of the tools is the so-called EU Taxonomy, a classification system for sustainable activities. So what is this taxonomy all about and how it is connected to the bigger theme of sustainability? Dr. Sven Stadman, Senior Sustainability Counsel from our Berlin office in Germany, will give us a brief introduction as a basis for the discussion. Sven is a highly skilled sustainability expert with more than 10 years of experience working with public and private sector entities, as well as NGOs. Sven has helped several customers, for instance, in corporate sustainability. So let's hear what he has to say. The stage is yours, Sven.
Thank you so much, Kaja, for this lovely introduction. Also from my side, a really warm welcome to everybody in this webinar over here. I just learned this morning that we had over 100 registrations over here. So I'm really, really excited to see so many people being interested in this topic. And to begin with, before we do like this deep dive into the taxonomy, I would just like help us just take a few steps back and take a look at the bigger picture of sustainability. Also help us remember why we are working in this field and just like why it is such a rewarding and also challenging area at the same time. Yeah, the reason why I am here is quite simple. It's because I love sustainability, not just because I think it's the right thing to do, but it's just also, keep it simple, so much fun to work with, right? It's just such a diversity of topics. You're constantly reinventing yourself as a consultant because you're like, no case is ever the same. And here at AFRY, we also like try to provide like tailored sustainability solutions. So you're always working with very diverse teams and always like picking the right people for the job. And this will always just like it just helps your mind and your skills and your experience, both personally and also like career-wise expanding. So from their side, it's like, I really like working with this topic. And of course, when it comes to the topic of sustainability in future cities, just quickly start sharing my screen here. Cities, of course, have a very special place when it comes to sustainability. As you might be aware of, may or may not be aware of, we are currently witnessing one of the largest migrations of people that has ever occurred in the history of humanity. So we have like millions and millions of people moving into the cities. So, and they are putting, of course, because this migration takes places, they are always putting more and more stress on these systems, causing cities to consume ever more resources and energy, and causing them to require more and more space to house people and the spaces where they live. So, and of course, a very human concept, it causes them to cause more and more waste. And from a sustainability perspective, they are one of the main drivers of global change. And we have like a special, them to take cities and their development into special consideration when looking at creating a more sustainable society. Just to give you a few very placative examples of what you may encounter, even like the topic of transportation, getting people from A to B can get really complex very fast when you're talking, when you're trying to plan this in the city, right? Because you need to achieve that without paving the whole area in concrete. You also need to achieve retrofitting and upgrading your public transport fleet with low emission systems without making it too expensive to use them, right? So there's a social component as well. Another example, if you're working in the municipality of Stockholm, you might have already encountered the challenges of planning a city in the boundaries of an urban national park. So there's also like the alignment of city development, urban development with biodiversity and conservation efforts. Of course, we need to create spaces where people work. We need to shape them in a way that they are built sustainably and built for the future. And of course, in the end, it's also centered around the question of how do we want and how do we define and create the spaces for people to develop and thrive. So this is the heart of sustainability when it comes to cities. Now, I know sustainability can be incredibly intimidating, sometimes even overwhelming, since there are so many different aspects to consider. And one of the jobs today is also to help you understand that it is actually possible to break down a really complex problem such as sustainability, into more manageable parts. And one way I usually do that, and I really like to do, is using this concept that's just like keeps popping up here right now on my slide, which is the concept of sustainable development goals. This is like a commonly agreed on framework. Many people know this, might already know this, a commonly agreed on frameworks established by the United Nations to define the most challenging tasks that we need to tackle when we want to achieve a sustainable society, a sustainable global community. And you can actually use these goals. And actually, if you have a project in a city or just like more, whether it's simple or complex, you can always use these to get like a first grasp of how your project does affect sustainability. So you can look at the different aspects. For instance, number one, does it affect the target poverty? Does it affect clean water and sanitation? And then you will realize at the end, depending on your project, some of these goals are more relevant to your case than others. So that it will help you prioritize, which is really a good exercise, because to every goal, there's a certain set of methodologies and solutions connected that you can use for your project. So for instance, if you have like goal 11 prioritize for your project with chances but also challenges, there's a huge toolbox regarding climate change and circular economy methodologies that you can apply to tackle these challenges. Yeah, so this is just like a little bit of an introduction of how sustainability applies in the context of future cities, and also how these complex challenges that we are all going to encounter can be broken down into more manageable concepts. And I think for now I'm going to take a break here and hand this invisible microphone back to Kaya. So thank you again. Thanks so much for letting me share these slides.
Thank you so much, Sven. So as we heard from Sven, there are many things to consider, but we have good examples how companies have addressed these challenges. And this is what we'll hear more in the panel discussion with experts from various business sectors, just in a short while. Before that, Johan Frid, Senior Sustainability Advisor from AFRY in Malmö, Sweden, will share some examples and learnings of EU taxonomy in practice, and a case he has been involved in. Varsågod, Johan.
Thank you, Kaja, for that presentation. My name is Johan Frid, and I have worked with sustainability and helping companies for over 15 years, both as a consultant and as an environmental manager in the industry. I will try to tell you some of the insights I have gained by working with the EU taxonomy in projects during this presentation. First, I would like to discuss why we have a taxonomy. In order to reach the EU's commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050 and the other objectives of the European Green Deal, it's of utmost importance to direct investments towards sustainable projects and activities. The EU taxonomy is one of the tools that will help investors and business to contribute to the Paris Agreement and move towards a zero carbon emissions. So what is the taxonomy? First of all, it is a standardized classification system which describes what constitutes a sustainable activity under the EU Green Deal. It includes 6 environmental objectives, as you can see on the right of the screen, but only the 2 climate change mitigation and adaptation have been released so far. The other 4 will be released later this year or next year. It's also common guidelines and opportunity for comparison between activities, investments that are intended to make the taxonomy its flexible system to fit different investment strategies and styles. It's based on expert recommendations and closely linked to the science-based targets to fight climate change. The taxonomy is also intended to be dynamic and encouraging the expansion of the objectives. Over time, stricter technical criteria will follow and thresholds, as well as including other economic sectors that are not included today. The classification system can also be used on a voluntary basis by any other market actors other than those that are captured by the NFRD directive. So it's free for everyone who wants to use it to start using it. So, are you affected by the taxonomy? If you're quick, you might be able to use our self-assessment tool that is on the screen now to understand if you are affected by the taxonomy or not. The taxonomy, it applies to companies with more than 500 employees and companies that have to comply with a non-financial reporting directive called the NFRD. Also, financial market participants have to work with taxonomy, and also the EU member states, as you can see in this process. So, is that it? As I mentioned earlier, only 2 of the taxonomy's 6 environmental objectives has been released, and the remaining will be released later on this year or next year. Investors who are affected by the taxonomy right away now will already now start to asking companies how they comply with the taxonomy. And companies that voluntarily start to work with the taxonomy now might even experience a first mover advantage. There are also other markets looking at establishing their own taxonomy. For example, Canada, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, and the UK. Since the financial market is global, this will also affect other countries outside the EU. For example, European investors will ask the companies in other markets how they comply to the taxonomy, since the investors have to show how they are working with it. And also European companies operating globally will be likely to apply the EU taxonomy in their global operations. As I said, I recently finished a project regarding the taxonomy, and we're looking at others, of course. This was a project I did for Heimstaden, an international real estate owner with a lot of apartments in different countries across Europe. The real estate sector is closely linked to the finance sector and the investors. And it also plays a key role in the transition towards sustainability. In the EU, the largest energy consumers are real estate. And it's also responsible for about 40% of the energy consumption in the EU and 36% of the carbon emissions. At the same time, embodied carbon emissions are increasing and receiving growing attention from the public. About 3/4 of the European buildings are considered inefficient, and only a small part of them are being renovated each year. For the real estate sector, construction of new buildings and renovation of existing buildings and acquisition and ownership of buildings are the most relevant economic activities classified in the taxonomy. When we did the assessment for Heimstaden, the delegated act, it was earlier, was published in November, suggested that only the Class A energy performance certificates buildings would apply to the taxonomy. But since then, this would have been a problem, since that would reduce the eligible assets by up to 95%. And that's because the EPC levels are different in almost every country in Europe. With the latest version of the taxonomy, the delegated act from April, this has been adjusted, which is very good. So now both A-rated properties and those that belong to the top 15% of a national or regional building stock expressed as operational primary energy demand are considered sustainable. There's also a distinction between residential buildings and commercial properties in the classification. It will be very interesting to see how the other environmental objectives, including circular economy, will handle renovations. Areas of interest are, as I said before, embodied carbon, life cycle of buildings, life carbon approach, and how the finance transition from brown to a green improved assets will be possible. So I would advise property companies not to wait in starting to analyze their assets according to the taxonomy. In addition, determining where the threshold of the top 15% in operational primary energy demand in each member state lies will require substantial work and investigation. And of course, it's not just the real estate companies that has to do this. It's important that all companies, no matter which sector they are in, start working with the taxonomy. So a good way to start is to review which codes applies to the activities of a company and review the do no significant harm principle and the significant contribution they have to make to each objective. Also identify the KPIs, the key performance indicators per economic activity, and prepare your data collection, since this always takes time. And if you need help, review those available information that's online from EU, or you can contact us and we will help you. So to sum up the reasons why you need to start now is this is a legal compliance. You have to, if your business is included in the taxonomy, you have to do this. This is mandatory. Your reputation is also depending on the compliance, and it's most valuable asset. And a good reputation and will also attract more investors. It will also gain access to new finance that is not available for those who don't apply to the taxonomy. And by assessing your activities, you can understand your sustainable impact of a company. And this, of course, is good for every business to understand how they affect the environment. And last of all, it's also risk management and building resilience for a company. And by illustrating an overall preparedness, some uncertainty is alleviated, and this can raise overall company value, for example, stocks and bonds. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I wish you best of luck working with the taxonomy. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. Good to see that there are already real cases where the taxonomy has been applied. So it is not that far away from day-to-day business, is it? Next, we will have a panel discussion around the topic. And I would like to warmly welcome our first panelist, Jenny Svärd, who is the Director of Environmental Policies from Confederation of Swedish Enterprise. In her role in the Confederation, Jenny works closely with the different business sectors to promote a well-functioning business environment to enable the Swedish business community's transition in becoming fossil-free and circular and stay competitive. Prior to this, Jenny has worked within the aviation sector as environmental manager of two of Sweden's largest airports, Stockholm Arlanda and Stockholm Bromma. Jenny, you have worked with these policies. So what is their impact to businesses across Europe?
Yes, thank you, Kaja. I'm very glad to be here today. I have worked with environmental issues for more than 20 years, the latest 3 at the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise. And I am completely convinced that the solutions to reach climate neutrality and other sustainability goals lie within the business sector. Since I'm from the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, I can only speak for the business sector in Sweden. There's a broad consensus that extensive investment from both the public and the private sector is needed for the success of the green transition. The business sector in Sweden is positive about creating greater unity and a common language for the financial industry for the investments needed to cope with the transition. The business sector is fully supportive of initiatives being taken to support investments that can contribute to the sustainable development. About the taxonomy then, we have had some comments and concern about the proposal from the Commission in November 2020. On the overall picture, the proposal for the design of the technical criteria for the climate-related sections of the taxonomy has been adjusted in a positive direction. We do still, however, have some concerns, and I would like to mention a couple of them. Electrification is key for a more sustainable future, and there is now an increasing consensus that our electricity use in Sweden can more than double by 2045, since increased energy is needed for the transition. Therefore, our biggest concern about the taxonomy remained about the effects that the taxonomy may have on Swedish energy supply and thereby the transition to a fossil-free society. To deliver this increased need for electricity, we need a cost-effective and delivery secure electricity system. And that requires extensive reinvestments in existing hydropower and nuclear power. And it is therefore worrying that there are an obvious risk that these two fossil-free sources of power, which today together make up almost 80% of Swedish electricity production, might be classified as unsustainable in the taxonomy. The capacity of large-scale hydropower to adapt to demand is also needed to the continued expansion of renewable weather-dependent energy like wind and solar power. Biofuels can play an important role in the transition to a climate-neutral society. They are, for example, key for Sweden to be able to effectively phase out the use of fossil fuels in the transport sector, which today accounts for around 1/3 of our total CO2 emissions. It is therefore worrying It's therefore worrying that the taxonomy disadvantages biofuel use. Finally, we are also concerned about that the introduction of the reporting requirements for the climate remains set for the 1st of January 2022, since that assumes that companies already collect the required data, despite that the delegated act with the set criteria has not yet been adopted. We therefore believe that the reporting requirements need to be postponed to at least 1st of January 2023. And impacts in the short term then, we mainly see an increased burden of reporting, also for those companies that deliver goods and services to corporations which are required to report. And also an uncertainty regarding the classification of certain activities and future taxonomies. Impacts in the long run then, it's highly uncertain. It will depend on which taxonomies we establish, their content and how they are used by investors and lawmakers. If the technical criteria promote their aim and investors use the taxonomy to inform their decisions in the right way, it can probably become a useful tool in terms of promoting sustainability.
Very interesting, Jenny. As you also said that the demand for electricity will double the coming 10 years, am I right? And you have also good insights across the Swedish business environment. So where do you think the Swedish companies and cities are today with the taxonomy and also checking the alignment with the taxonomy?
Yes, Swedish companies are in the forefront of their sustainability work. There are large efforts and investments already made to become climate neutral and circular. Sustainability goes hand in hand with profitable and competitive companies. And all sectors in Sweden have this agenda, and there's full activity in this area. We find it's very important that the coming criteria for environmental objectives 3 to 6 promote this ongoing transition. And we will find it very interesting to analyze the upcoming consultation about those objectives in June. Despite the focus on sustainability in the business community, this is a difficult question to answer, and it is most likely varies a lot between different actors and how their thoughts on sustainability are aligned with the taxonomy. Certain businesses will likely face more difficulties than others, depending on their area of business and the difficulty of obtaining the needed data. Thank you.
But is the taxonomy the only driver for companies to be more sustainable?
The short answer to that is absolutely not. The Swedish business sector is, as I mentioned already, in the forefront with the green transition, and the taxonomy has not even been implemented yet. So this is already happening. The Swedish business community see the need for action to reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement, and they see their responsibility and possibilities to contribute to a fossil-free society. And yes, for that, more investments are needed. Many of our companies are already leaders in developing innovations, technologies, and products that provide solutions for realizing climate improvements and a more sustainable future. Sweden has already come a long way in producing and exporting low carbon technologies and goods, bringing climate benefits that extend far beyond European borders.
It's great to
There
hear
are
that
also
there has
several
been
other
so much progress already in Sweden. But then would you say that the EU taxonomy is a blessing or a burden for the Swedish companies and cities?
Well, that remains to be seen. As I said before, we need to know, to get more information, not at least for the upcoming environmental objectives. And then also, as I mentioned, we have some concerns about climate criteria as well. So that remains to be seen, but we definitely hope that this will be a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. As we heard also from Johan in the earlier example, there are already a lot of things happening also in the real estate sector. Therefore, I'm very glad to have Philip Elland here today with us. Philip is the head of sustainability at Castellum, one of the largest publicly traded property management firms in Sweden. He's also chairman of the Quality Council at Sweden Green Building Council, member of the European Public Real Estate Sustainability Committee, and a member of the CRESP Benchmark Committee. So Philip,
thank you.
What kind of targets and plans Castellum has when it comes to taxonomy issues going forward? And where are you situated today?
Well, since this has happened quite fast, and well, to start off, I would say that from our perspective and from my perspective, I think that the taxonomy in general is like great, and the decisions have come very fast, which is very, of course, very important to get us faster in the right direction, because at the moment we are moving in the wrong direction. So in generally, we think this is great. Then, of course, we have a lot of concerns as well, as previous speakers said. But our opinion, we have got a lot of questions from banks, from lenders, from analysts who wants to speak with us about the taxonomy and how we are affected and how our revenues align with the taxonomy. So even before it was actually decided in April, the final version of the first two objectives, we have had a lot of questions. So we saw it as very important to be fast and be quick in this matter. And together with the industry, we have set up a small task force to evaluate and think how should we evaluate, for example, the top 15% for the industry in Sweden, and how should that be implemented, because there are no references to look at. So because of all the questions that we had, and from banks and from analysts, we felt an obligation. We felt that we have to also show how would our portfolio look before someone else do the analysis for us. So in our Q1 report for 2021, which was released the same day as the taxonomy was decided in the Commission, we presented our first figures of how our revenues, how our OPEX and CAPEX align with the taxonomy, based on our opinion, of course, which we will have to, together with industry, look further into. So there are some first thoughts on that.
It's really great to hear, Philip, that you are really in the forefront and already have applied or checked your company's alignment with the taxonomy. And from that insights that you have, what about the impact for the real estate market, property owners, developers? What is your picture of that?
Well, of course, as also was mentioned before, the first versions that we saw last year, they spoke of the 15%, and then it was just the EPC A-graded properties, and now it's A-graded properties and 15%. So of course there are more eligible assets that will be seen as green. But how this will affect the market, I would say our first concern is that when you look at the carbon emissions, since these two indicators that have been decided right now are trying to tackle the climate objective. When you look at Castellum's emission, if you look at scope 1, 2, and 3, the taxonomy right now only focuses on the 1.5% of our total emissions, leaving out the 98.5% of the emissions. And the lion part of the real estate sector's emissions come from development and material. So at the moment, you could actually produce and construct a climate bomb using bad materials, using a lot of steel, a lot of concrete, which we use in the industry. But the only criteria that you have to fill up is the one on energy intensity and have a good A grade for the new property, for example. So it will be very tough for existing and older buildings to align with the taxonomy. And in the worst scenario, it could actually mean that to get this property, to get this building to the A grade or to the top 15%, you have to demolish the building and construct a new building, which would emit a lot more emissions and would actually go in totally the other direction than the taxonomy is trying to stimulate. So that is what we see, and that is our concern at the moment. But of course, we understand that we have to start with the things that we can measure. And what you can measure from the EU perspective is, of course, the energy intensity, even if there are some gaps when it comes to the reference bank and to calculate the top 15%.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting to hear that, because also I'm very hopeful that the EU renovation wave will have incentives that we don't need to demolish, and we will actually also renovate the buildings, so that these two directives will go hand in hand. But also the same question to you, Philip, that do you think that the EU taxonomy is a blessing or a burden for the real estate sector? What do you think?
Well, there was someone in the beginning saying that this is the man on the moon moment for the European Union. I guess at the moment it's not. It's great that we have come to a decision so fast that is necessary and urgent. But I hope and I think that this will be a blessing, because now that you have defined and trying to define, hopefully redefining some indicators. But when you do this, you set a direction, and you can also set up other legislation that could promote the green activities. So going forward, this could actually, and hopefully it will accelerate the climate ambitions, not just in Europe, but also wider than Europe, as previous speakers mentioned as well. So I think that this is a blessing. Then we, of course, have to work with the KPIs, and from each industry we have to collaborate, and we have to also live in and give our feedback back to the Commission and the technical team, so we can set up a good pathway going forward.
Thank you, Philip. This is a very interesting discussion indeed, and thank you to both panelists for bringing your insights to the table. If I'd like to summarize the discussion, I got the feeling that the taxonomy is not the only driver for companies to become more sustainable. It's great to hear that the Swedish enterprise businesses are fully supportive of investments directed for more sustainable activities. At the same time, we also think that the EU taxonomy can accelerate the transition towards a more sustainable society, but we do have some challenges ahead. And now we'll go forward with the program. Next, I'd like to welcome Anna-Karin Jönbrink, who is Section Manager, Environment and Sustainability at AFRY in Gothenburg, Sweden. Anna-Karin has been working for more than 20 years with environmental policy development on international and national level. And recently, she has been involved in the development of new policies, their implementation and effect on companies, and has also been helping companies to align to the regulations. What I'd like to ask from you, Anna-Karin, is how can companies be more sustainable? If a company needs to fill their requirements and also gain business benefits, what should they be doing?
Well, thank you very much for this introduction, Kaja. I am very happy to be here, and I really think that the sustainability is, as we said, on everybody's lips. So it's the most important thing for many of us today. And as I have been working with these issues for more than 20 years, helping companies and other organizations, I have seen that it has been developed quite intense the last couple of years, but there have been many ones doing a lot already earlier. But when it comes to sustainability, there are many things to consider, but how are they related? Today we learned very much. I also want to share my screen with you. So we have learned very much about the sustainability and about the EU taxonomy. The taxonomy is, of course, very, very important. But there are also many other things to consider for an organization who wants to gain competitiveness in a sustainable society. And my research done earlier shows that the key things for most companies going for sustainability is that they want to improve their competitiveness by using sustainability for that, and that they see an increasing demand from society, but also from their clients and customers to get there. First of all, I want to emphasize that to reach sustainability, we have to take a holistic view, and this is a way to describe that with this animation on the slide. What we are trying to describe there is that we are all a part of the global ecosystem from which we get all our resources, such as raw materials, energy, food, air, and water. Sustainable development aims at mankind coming in balance with that system. And using the words from the Brundtland Commission, it's a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But we are also a part of the society, and we need the infrastructure to live our lives. So we are a part of the ecosystem, we are a part of the social infrastructure, society and the infrastructure. And then we see here, we have a lot of products. They are used by people, but we have to consider the whole product life cycle when it comes to sustainability performance, from raw materials, manufacturing in many steps, transport, use, and not least end of life and possible circulation back again. And there we see that companies, they are a part of the system, often taking responsibility for a product or a system, but also need to take responsibility for the company itself. But what can we do in order to achieve sustainability? Well, we have first, and I don't know whether this, I'm trying to follow an order to describe this to you. I hope that the logistics will be clear for you. But we have regulations and demands. For example, the EU Green Deal, where the taxonomy is an important part, but we also see Eco-Design Directive and many, many others. There are permits and local regulations to consider, customer requirements, frameworks and guidelines. So for an organization, you have to consider many of these regulations and demands. As an organization, you need to ensure that you fulfill those regulations and demands, and not least your own ambitions, then governance is an important tool. You can use Agenda 2030. There are targets and programs such as the science-based targets, and of course, management systems such as ISO 14000 and others. In order to understand your performance when it comes to sustainability, you might need to do assessment and calculations. You can do climate calculations, for example, using greenhouse gas protocol to calculate the carbon emissions from an organization or a facility or so. But there are also life cycle assessments to find the environmental performance or sustainability performance actually of a product through the whole life cycle. There can also be sustainability impact assessments. So in order to really ensure that you know your sustainability or environmental or climate impact, there might be a need to do calculations and assessments. Then, of course, if you want to provide this and tell your clients and customers and the society or whoever in the surrounding what about your performance, sustainability performance, reporting is an important tool, and communication. And there we see sustainability reporting like GRI. We see those climate and financial things such as TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. There are also environmental, social, and governance, ESG, for an organization. And then we have environmental product declarations and other ways to describe the performance of a product. So you might need to describe your performance to your clients and the surrounding using these tools. But last and not least, all these things are about how to measure, what are the legal things, but you also need to improve. How can we improve sustainability to fulfill all these things, to get better numbers? So you need to improve. And there are many ways to improve your business or organization or your product, depending, of course, of what kind of organization you are. It can be about teaching your staff or your clients how to use the products also in order for them to behave in a more sustainable way. It can be design of products and processes to make them more sustainable, using less energy or less material or smarter technical solutions. It can be about circular economy, where we see a need perhaps to change the business model, the product, the logistics, or other things in order to make sure that this really works. And then, of course, there are environmental techniques and other technical solutions. And I think that it's all connected, and it's all a holistic view. And for an organization, it's important to remember that there are all these things. One difficult thing might be to understand and choose where to start. Well, when my colleagues and I am out helping companies and other organizations, we often get through regulations and demands for them, but also their own ambitions. And then together with the client, we find the path most applicable for that organization. Because we know that the goal is to ensure or improve competitiveness in a sustainable future. And I think that it's important to take the holistic view, but it's also very important to get started, to do something small enough so you can really take it in a bit, and then let it grow to something larger if you didn't start already. But there is an importance for the holistic view. I think that we will all gain from every organization becoming more sustainable.
Thank
And
you,
that
Anna-Karin.
all-
So there are
No,
certainly a lot of things
I
where we can
have-
make real improvements from the sustainability point of view, as Anna-Karin has shown right now. So do we have some questions from the chat? And yes, we do. And I think the first question would be for you, Philip. And I think that it's meant for the Swedish regulations here. So, Philip, are you there?
Yes.
Yes,
I'm here.
great. So the question is the relationship between regulations on climate declaration for buildings and EU taxonomy. Is there a conflict? And maybe the background here is that in Sweden from 1st of January 2022, we will have legislation for climate declaration for building materials. So yes, Philip.
Yes, I would say there are no conflict. Building declarations, climate declarations is great that we will implement that from next year. From our side, this is nothing new. This is something that we have been working with in our developments. What is still missing, as I mentioned before, is there are no KPIs, or there are no levels to align to. So you just have to do a declaration on the climate or the carbon footprint of the building. That is what you have to declare, similar to the energy certificate or the energy performance certificate, EPC grade. So it's similar to that, but there are no levels. So you actually could still build that climate bomb from a material perspective. If you just comply with building regulations, which mainly links to energy performance. So declarations is a great step, but we have to look at levels quickly. And hopefully before 2027, that has been well communicated, that there will be some kind of discussion about levels. So hopefully we can get there faster, and the taxonomy would be great to get us moving. But there are no conflict.
Thank you, Philip. And then we have a few more questions to Johan, that is here in the studio. And one of them is the reactions from institutional investors in terms of including it into the screening processes. So I guess it's for the taxonomy, right? Yeah, you can check the question yourself.
Yes, reactions from investors. From what I've seen during our research, there are already screening processes in place in order to find those who are complying with the taxonomy. And from what I've heard from friends working in the financial sector, they will also transfer their requirements to their customers within a short time as well. So I'd say the reactions from them are positive, and we are prepared for it.
Another question then, quite concrete. How do you report the taxonomy work? Is it enough with a few sentences in the yearly report, or does it need to be more concrete?
Well, it depends, of course, on which requirements, what type of industry it is. Because this is described very well in the taxonomy, what you need to report. And how you do it, it depends, of course, on the type of business. But it needs to be in the non-financial statements, annual reports, or a sustainability report. So if it's short or long, it doesn't really matter, as long as everything that's required is part of it, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a very good final question. Will the taxonomy become compulsory?
Yes, actually, it already is, of course. Again, depending on which sector you are in, it's compulsory for the financial institutions and so on. And then it's also compulsory for the companies that the taxonomy applies to. As I showed in the process image earlier, the companies with more than 500 employees and those that have to comply with a non-financial reporting directive are required to start reporting on this next year for this year's activities, of course. So it is already mandatory, and more companies and sectors will be added later on as well.
Thank you, Johan.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for your questions. So to summarize the discussion, and as we have heard today, taxonomy can help make our cities more sustainable in the future. And at the same time, it can be a competitive advantage for the companies who can grasp the opportunities it brings. The taxonomy is not the only driver for companies to be more sustainable, but it is an important way forward to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable society. So it's time to wrap it up. And I would like to thank Jenny and Philip for participating in the panel discussion with your valuable input from your different perspectives. Thank you for our speakers today. Thank you, Sven, Johan, and Anna-Karin, for increasing our knowledge about the EU taxonomy and for your insights. The recording of this event will be available on the AFRY YouTube channel, and we will also notify you by email when the recording is available. For more events like this, follow AFRY on LinkedIn to stay up to date on the upcoming Future Cities events. And of course, if you have any more questions, do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you for listening, and see you soon again.